Continuing on the red onion painting, I'm going to work on one onion at a time. And I'll start with this large one. That'll help me establish values and colors that I can play off of for the other onions. I'm going to use a fairly large brush to begin with. My goal on this painting, as all these smaller paintings, these are color sketches. They're done fairly quickly and fairly loosely. My goal in showing you my painting style is to help you see that you can have a realistic painting that's not too fussy. So I'll start with some of the darker colors, and if you haven't already, I recommend that you watch the color mixing video for this painting. So this darker purple is raw umber, magenta, and some violet. I want my brush strokes to all go in toward the right direction, toward where the roots are, where they attached. I'm starting off with fairly thin paint. And I'm not worried yet about all the color variations that I see. I'll get to those in a moment. Going to a little bit brighter dark purple as I continue around here. That means it has more magenta in it. And a little bit lighter still as I continue around this side. You can see how it's a little lighter and a little more color in it. And I'm bringing this dark color a little farther into the onion than you see in the photograph so I can blend the lighter colors into it. Brighten this a little more. There's a little bit of the peel, of the paper peel, and I don't want to obscure that because I like that. I'll use a little smaller brush now and work on these lighter colors. The medium that I use, by the way, is at this stage mostly paint thinner, but if I want a little more body, I'm using Liquin Impasto. using a little more paint, but keeping it pretty thin. A little darker right here. In this area where it's quite a bit lighter, I want to go to a lighter version of what I'm using, which is just adding white to magenta, raw umber, and some violet. Add some medium to that. See how I'm painting up into that darker color. Keep my brush strokes in the correct direction for the structure of this onion. I'm not going to do the highlight just yet because it'll likely disappear if I do it too early. I'm going to add a little bit of white, get that quite a bit lighter. Some of these areas. I'm going to clean that brush. And using some of that reddish or redder color, where I've added some cadmium red light to it, to magenta. Right in here you can see where there's just a little more red. And it's okay to exaggerate that slightly, but don't get too carried away. And I started off with that a little brighter than you see because it's going to get blended into some of these colors. Go back to a little darker color to help up here. Using that same color as before, but thicker now. And the shading on this side is a little more violet in it than I have, so let's have that. And a little bit of cobalt blue. So let's pick up some white. And a little bit of cobalt blue and make more of a grayish blue for some of these highlights that are in the shadows. So like down here, for example. I'm going to add some highlights now with a different brush, a small brush, but that size of brush. This photograph is from a farmer's market in Colebrook, New Hampshire, I believe it was. And it's outside, so some of the highlights are pretty strong. And by using a pure white on top of what I've already painted, I get the color I want to end up with right here, which is not a pure white. Dragging that white through these still wet colors gives me these highlights that aren't pure white. This one is pretty bright. I don't want to fuss with those highlights very much. Just put them there and leave them. I'm going to just mix some white into that red color that I'd used before. For these guys here. mix that into that bluish gray color. When I say gray, I didn't add any black to it. It's just appears a little gray against the intense purples. And on top here, there's some highlights that have a little bit of yellow, so I just added some yellow ochre to what I was using. Okay, now I'm going to get some of that dark purple, but add more raw umber to it for this area around where the roots had been. I'm going to get a softer, small brush. I'm going to use white with a little bit of that yellow ochre. And by painting it on top of this, it won't end up white. Make a stroke, get more paint on your brush. Don't go too far trying to stretch that paint or you will end up with mud. And these have been cut pretty close. There's a few strays, but I like those strays. So I'm going to just add a couple more here. Add some white into that purple to get those guys. When you're painting wet on wet, which most of this painting will be, I'll do some overpainting in the final stage, but I try to paint as much as I can wet on wet. And if you're having trouble getting white to stick to stuff, just thin it down. And don't overwork it. There's a little peel thing here that I don't really like, so I'm not going to put it in. I do like some of the imperfections that you get with any onion. And switching back to one of my thicker hog hair brushes. I'm going to get a little more red. Into the onion. I'm going to use some raw sienna just to get a little more color into these roots here. A little darker than that. Okay, that's good enough for right now. I'm going to end here and we'll pick up in just a little bit.